Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ102, Introduction to Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice. Tonight's lecture is going to be on Chapter 12, where we are going to spend some time talking about becoming a law enforcement professional. And there's quite a bit of information to cover. So again, please do me a favor and make sure that you read the chapters completely. So you can add some context to the lecture this evening, along with taking the time to go over the key terms that are located in the front of your chapters, of each chapter, and also look at some of those discussion questions as well. Now, as usual, I'm going to skip past the learning objectives because those are things that I want you to take the time to read. And then after you study your chapter, go back and kind of assess yourself to see what you've actually learned and perhaps what you haven't learned. And along with this, I threw in some different recruitment videos for you to look at because it's always good to kind of see what's out there and what different police departments and sheriff's departments have to offer. And when you logged into this class initially, you probably looked at the intro page and it had a video of the recruitment efforts for the Rialto Police Department. Well, here I've got the Sheriff's Department in San Bernardino County, Chino PD, and then LAPD. And I wanted to take a moment, and it's going to take about 4 minutes, but I want to set the stage for this actual session that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to watch this.
Anybody who grows up here in Southern California knows there's so many different cultures. We would go to Samoan Thanksgiving. Okay, we wouldn't have a traditional American Thanksgiving with the turkey and stuff. I remember going to luau's. Initially, my parents and I, we are political refugees. We actually came from Afghanistan back in 1983 after the Soviet invasion. Basically started our lives all over again. They came to live the American dream. They taught me the importance of always doing the right thing, what values and morals that I have. That's kind of what helped me to decide to be a police officer. I love Los Angeles. I was raised in the San Fernando Valley. The San Fernando Valley, I've lived there for 35 plus years now in my life. So to me, it's the best place to grow up. What the city provided for me versus any other city, they gave me the opportunity. And so I have a fierce loyalty to Los Angeles and what they stand for. Many community members think that we're just out there and it's just a job, but it's not. The majority of people on this job, we come on the job for two reasons. Go out there and help people in the community to fight crime. And unfortunately, 1/10% of an incident that occurs, millions of incidents that occur across the country throughout the year, that's what gets the spotlight put on it. And many think that's the whole department, that's the whole police force, but it's not. My job is not to judge you because you're a gang member. My job is not to judge you because of where you grew up. It's to understand and be compassionate where you grew up. If I get a domestic violence type of call, I'm not, hey, is it a black and a white, type of relationship, or is it a Hispanic and an Asian relationship? Like, honestly, I can care less. At the end of the day, I'm looking for it for what it is. I mean, the last thing I'm thinking of is race. I get nothing out of a person by being negative. I believe in overwhelming positive action. Treat everyone the way that I would treat my mom, my brother, my father, my kids. Get engaged and really, pay attention to what's going on. But the first thing that really got into my mind is, do I really want to carry a gun? And do I really want to get involved in a controversial shooting period? You head to the building, you're climbing up the stairs looking for someone, and then you see a man, and you're like, okay, like, this is a man. Now you're looking at the hands, because that's what hurts people. So you're looking at the hands, and he starts doing weird things, like, hey, keep your hands out, and then he goes in there real quick. And next thing you know, it's a cell phone. I mean, it goes like that. The time of someone pulling out a cell phone or a gun and pulling that trigger can be really quick. Next thing you know, you're okay. So I got this camera on, I got this on, and okay, I gotta remember to keep this on. Wait, is it off yet? Wait, hold on a second. We're going into lost, I could have turned it off. Just privacy issues. Make sure that's on. Make sure that's on off. You know, the job of a police officer. And mind you, I'm all for transparency. It's a lot. You can make no sense of why you would run towards gunfire. It's something that you're either born with or you're not born with.
One punch and I'm out. You know, one punch to make my partner come out. And I think about these things. And so that will to survive is, okay, what's the smartest move?
You know, you get a little nervous and, you know, you get a little fearful because, you know, you're pretty much putting your life on it. Back in 2011, my partner and I were ambushed by two local gang members. I was shot several times. Through all my training and experience, we got through the situation. I'm here today. It was a life-changing moment for me. And it was difficult on my family, but after a lot of physical therapy, multiple surgeries, I came back to the field. I wouldn't do any other job than this job. You know, at the end of the day, it's just kind of hard to fill the shoes of a police officer.
What we stand for, what we represent, is good, kindness, faith, community. The city of LA, one of the best cities in the world.
All right, well, let's see if I can get back to the screen. Well, here we go. That actually worked out okay. Well, I hope you were able to glean something out of that particular video, and it kind of goes to show you that a lot of times people have perceptions about law enforcement, and when it comes down to it, you can easily see that law enforcement officers, they have a very challenging job, but they're human beings just like everybody else. Now, with that being said, yes, there are a lot of controversial aspects and things that are going on in policing today. And at the end of the day, again, you know, 99.9%, as I've said before, are out there to do the right thing, such as the officers' stories that you heard in the video. So what are people looking for? And this is, I'm going to hit this quickly because it's a good way to kind of get into becoming a law enforcement officer. And these are just a small list, if you will, of the desired qualities that people are looking for in officers. Now, this doesn't necessarily represent what a department recruitment flyer might have, although some of these might be duplicated. But there was, and we'll get to it in a minute, an actual kind of a listening group, if you will, where recruiters and law enforcement went out and talked to the community and said, hey, well, what are you looking for in a police officer? And here are some of the results. So let's kind of dive right in. Able to work under pressure, accept direction, problem solve, communicate effectively, should have self-respect, ego control, initiative, integrity, leadership skills, the ability to command respect. Should use good judgment, be considerate, compassionate, dependable, enthusiastic, ethical, fair, flexible, honest, humble, industrious. Wow, look at all these words. Intelligent, logical, motivated, neat. Okay, I guess they don't want like officers that are not neat. Observant, persuasive, physically fit, prompt, resourceful, self-assured, sensitive, stable, and tactful, and warm, and willing to learn and accept change. And I gotta say, you know what? This is actually, while it came from a group of citizens, it's a pretty darn good list when you really think about it. So this is, if you've never seen it before, the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. And this is a document that you are going to have to live by and basically swear by in order to be successful in law enforcement. And I'll read it very, very quickly because we have a lot of information to cover. But as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. And I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all, maintain courageous calm in the fear of danger, scorn, or even ridicule, develop self-restraint, and be constantly mindful of the welfare of others, honest in thought and deed in both my personal and official life. Wow, that might be tough. I will be exemplary in obeying all the laws of the land and the regulations of my department, whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature or that is confided to me in my official capacity will be kept ever secret unless revelation is necessary in the performance of my duty. I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudice, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. With no compromise for crime and with relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately, without fear or favor, malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary use or force of violence, and never accepting gratuities. And I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it. Because nobody's forcing you into this. And I hope you understand it. And I hope that the general citizenry would understand that. And when you look at all of this stuff, you can read it, and you can see that there's so much in there that if you really didn't want to do this, you wouldn't get into this game in the first place. But let me continue on. And then I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God and my chosen profession, law enforcement. And wow, that's just a lot of stuff to kind of take in. Because there's a lot of stuff, if you will, that you're going to have to deal with when you get into this realm or this career of law enforcement. So never before in the history of policing in the United States has it been more important to hire the right people for the job. And just kind of veering off really quickly, because I tend to do that, if you read the introduction to the chapter that talks about a couple of situations that took place in Cleveland and the officers that were involved, hopefully this statement here, the importance of hiring the right person, you can kind of draw that message that introduction is kind of sending, if you will, and why, in fact, it is important to hire the right people. And becoming a law enforcement professional is no easy task. We already know that. In the first 4 or 5 minutes, I'm sure you've probably already figured that out. And it's definitely not to be treated lightly. And in today's climate, those who aspire to wear the badge, they must be prepared to have their every action scrutinized. And that includes on duty and, yes, even off duty. And they must choose this profession for the right reasons, of which are many, and understand that the career, above all else, is one of service. This is a service-orientated career. Now, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP, has started the Why I Wear the Badge campaign to highlight the diversity and commitment of those who choose a career in the law enforcement profession. And I included this link in this presentation so you could actually click on it, and you'll see short video clips by officers from all across the United States that talk about why they wear the badge. What was it for them? Why did they get into law enforcement? And I think you might find that very, not just interesting, but maybe helpful as you decide if this really is the profession for you, and hopefully you have, but maybe you're kind of on the fence and you're really not sure. So this will kind of help you maybe figure that out or give you some ideas. Now, the badge itself is a symbol of courage and strength and integrity. But with the display of the badge comes this huge responsibility. So the first question I would kind of ask would be, so why do hundreds and thousands of men and women wear the badge today? And maybe the video that you saw from LAPD might help you answer some of those questions. Maybe you feel like some of those individuals that you saw speaking. Well, today's law enforcement agencies seek officers who possess qualities traditionally associated with policing, such as strength and endurance, as well as the emotional and intellectual characteristics needed to affect public order in this ever-changing and increasingly diverse society. So I can tell you the truth of the matter would be that years and years ago, 34 to be exact, when I got into law enforcement, a lot of emphasis was put on, strength and endurance and things like that. But as things started to change over the years, there were other characteristics that were needed in order to make a well-rounded, if you will, police officer. And a lot of those didn't really coincide with necessarily strength or endurance. They did coincide with things like emotional and intellectual intelligence and having people skills, which has become a critical tool for law enforcement officers, just like having, in today's law enforcement, it's great to have some technology skills because of all the technology that's out there. But if you go back to that list of characteristics, if you will, that even citizens wanted to see in their officers, you could see that it wasn't all about muscle or knuckle dragging or bench pressing 420 pounds. While those are great qualities, if you will, to be strong and to be fit and all that, there are other things that you really need to have overall to be successful. Now, in February of 2015, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing was held in Phoenix, Arizona. And during this meeting, and this has to do with some of those characteristics we talked about at the very beginning. So during this meeting, issues of police officer selection, training, and education were discussed at great length, and agencies were encouraged to look for and hire applicants who possessed character traits that support fairness and compassion and understanding and tolerance and cultural sensitivity. So kind of a different breed, maybe, if you will. And a lot of the qualities that you saw before, and I'll back up just really quick so you can take a quick look at them. And here they are right here. These are other qualities that came out of those meetings. And look at them. Humble, honest, logical, motivated, observant, persuasive, resourceful. And then you have things like warm, compassionate, considerate, willing to learn and adapt to change. So you can see it's kind of a new breed when it comes to the overall emphasis on becoming a police officer. Now, when we talk about becoming an officer, well, there's a lot of different factors that kind of come into play, and one of them would be selecting your agency. So before an agency can actually screen and select an officer candidate, you, the candidate, have to first decide, hey, where do I want to work? And this can be done by researching the available options and assessing one's own professional goals, and then evaluating and selecting specific agencies to apply to. And there are several factors that are important for those seeking employment in law enforcement, including but not limited to the advantages and disadvantages of some of the things I'm going to kind of go over now. And it could be employment with, let's say, municipal, county, state, or federal agencies. So what are the advantages of working with like municipal versus federal, or county versus state? And you have to kind of figure that out. How about working in a small, medium, or large agency? Small departments might be more family oriented possibly, and everybody kind of knows everybody, but maybe their level of promotability or advancement or being able to move to a different special assignment may not happen as frequently because the department is in fact so small. So those are things to look at. Well, what about high crime rate versus low crime rate? Some places are just a little bit busier than others based on the type of crime that they're dealing with. And that's something that you're going to have to decide. And even working where you grew up or where you lived. Would that be something that you would want to do? If you were raised in the city of Rialto, then maybe, like some officers have, they were born and raised and went to school there, and so they know a lot of people, and they know the community, and they know the city, and they thought it would be a great idea to work in their city, the city that means a lot to them. And some other factors, as it relates to selecting an agency, could be things like, well, how about salary and retirement? So how's the pay and how's the retirement, and what type of fringe benefits are there, and what's the reputation of the department? Does it have a good reputation? And as I said before, maybe how's the morale? Is there potential for promotions or room to advance? And this is kind of these are things that you need to really look at. What about the agency's current needs? Is there a hiring freeze, or has the agency gone through a lot of budget issues, or are there budget constraints, which means that they're going to be really tight financially for a while, and that could maybe lead to understaffing or what have you. But again, these are things that you really need to kind of look at. And often interested applicants may request in person at the department, over the phone or online, a fact sheet containing a brief job description, the salary range, the fringe benefits, and an application. So when you go online, and typically now most of the applications are done online, and they will have basically a recruitment flyer, which is similar to the fact sheet that I talked about. And on there, it'll talk all about these different things, so you can kind of figure out where you may want to go. So how does a law enforcement candidate find an open position to evaluate? Well, if the police agencies in the area are pretty progressive, they'll have a very successful recruiting program, and many also recruit online by posting job openings on their websites and on Facebook. They also have things like those recruitment videos that you've hopefully watched and seen a few, and some of them are actually pretty cool. And that's one way that they can kind of get the word out. And sometimes there's a word of mouth, meaning that maybe someone you know is in policing and they're telling you, hey, an agency here is hiring. Now, when we talk about salary and things like that, I thought it was interesting to throw this salary by state graph up here that shows the annual mean wage of police and sheriff's patrol officers. So that's kind of when you start out by state. And the dark blue would be the highest salary earners, and the kind of lighter blue would be the next, and a little bit lighter, and then all the way to the very, very light blue. And you can see, and if you look at California, we are definitely in California, one of the highest paid, at least as far as annual annual mean wage per state. So we know what citizens kind of want. So what are departments kind of looking for as far as desired qualities and things like that? Well, in most states, law enforcement candidates, besides some of the attributes and characteristics that you heard me talk about already, candidates must, however, be U.S. citizens and must meet rigorous physical and personal qualifications. So they're going to, have to take a physical agility test and a medical exam, etc. And they might have to take a written test, and we'll talk more about this. And they might have to do that physical agility, as I stated, to kind of show their conditioning. And again, if citizens were asked what traits they thought were desirable in police officers, their responses would be a little bit different than maybe just some of the basic ones that law enforcement is looking for. So police officers should be able to work under pressure and accept direction and problem solve and communicate effectively, both verbally and in writing, and have self-respect and ego control. You've heard that one. Initiative, integrity, leadership skills, and the ability to command respect. And all of these things are things that are in there. And then we can throw in all those other ones, like, at that first slide, like the good judgment and considerate, compassionate, dependable, enthusiastic, ethical, fair, flexible, honest, humble, industrious, intelligent, logical, motivated, neat, observant, persuasive, fit, prompt, resourceful, self-assured, sensitive, stable, tactful, warm, and willing to listen and accept change. Now, whoa. Now, unfortunately, no one has all of these traits. But the more of these traits a police officer possesses, without a doubt, the more effective he or she will be in dealing with people or the citizens of the community, as well as the lawbreakers. Now, and here's kind of some of those desired qualities that I just kind of rambled on. And a myth that's out there, before we get into this President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, a myth that's out there is that, you have to be perfect. You have to have no criminal history to even be considered as a candidate for police officer, so forget it, I might as well not even apply. And, okay, so although the standards are high and the competition can be fierce, a person who has made mistakes in his or her life can still become a police officer if the desire and the ability are there. Now, although there are several things that would, in fact, permanently disqualify someone from becoming a licensed police officer, lower level incidents or crimes even will not automatically disqualify someone. So, it should be noted that because there are plenty of candidates who do have clean records, this may pose some additional hurdles for you to kind of get through, because you might have some issues. But it all comes down to this. It comes down to desire, abilities, and what the person has done to learn from his or her mistakes that makes a good police officer. So keep that in mind as you're going through, and you might be thinking, well, oh my gosh, I did this. There are things out there that you're going to be able to work through, but you're just going to have to want it. So back to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And they identified here in 2015 the qualities, abilities, and capacities as being essential in becoming recruits. So community policing and problem solving principles, and interpersonal and communication skills, and bias awareness, and scenario-based situational decision making, crisis intervention principles, and procedural justice or fairness, and trauma and victim services, and mental health issues, and analytical research and technology, and languages and culture responsiveness, Now, with our society becoming increasingly diverse, it is critical that officers are able to police without bias or discrimination, and of course be sensitive to the needs and concerns of various populations within a community. And again, so these are qualities, abilities, and capabilities of being essential for success. So hopefully that kind of makes it a little bit clear. Now, a couple of other interesting things that we deal with when you're talking about finding qualified applicants. This is really no easy task. Departments searching for qualified applicants, a lot of times it is no easy task. And recruiting and screening and selecting are critical functions of all police agencies. And this other thing that comes into play, the generational transition currently underway and at the center of the workforce crisis that existed before the economic crisis, has changed the picture drastically, resulted from the convergence of two trends: the growing number of aging baby boomers and the much smaller cohort of younger people, or the Gen Xers, if you will, who follow them. And members of the 102 million strong millennial generation, okay, or Generation Y, if you will, born between 1982 and I think 2002, have yet to fully affect the law enforcement workplace, but they will be the majority of new police officers and deputies hired in the coming decade. So looking at the new breed of people when it comes to recruiting and the differences compared to the older baby boomers, if you will, that were born in the 50s and the 60s, compared to these millennials, or Generation Z now, as they call it, the digital generation. And these are the law enforcement officers of the future. Now one thing that I don't want everybody to kind of freak out about, but I want you to know, and this is still under the realm of finding qualified applicants, about 1 out of every 100 are really going to make it. And that's just, applications that are submitted. And because of a lot of reasons, and I'm going to go over some right now, and some of those reasons are going to be listed on page 489. But finding qualified police recruits became a little bit tougher after September 11, 2001, because the expansion of the federal law enforcement agencies has created more options for people interested in the field. And many candidates recruited for policing in the past are now being successfully recruited by other departments. And in addition, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have led many public service-minded, individuals to join the military. And yet another contributor to the reduction in qualified applicants may be the negative publicity over high-profile incidents of excessive force, and sometimes even racial profiling. And what this causes sometimes would be the agencies will start to sacrifice that quality for quantity, and possibly even, relaxing their hiring standards. But in addition to falling numbers of applicants, departments also face, again, other recruiting challenges, like appealing to that new generation we talked about, dispelling misconceptions of the real job caused by the mass media, and understanding that law enforcement has changed from the traditionally blue-collar job, if you will, to a challenging profession requiring technical skill. And in a strong economy, veteran officers and good potential candidates may be lured away from public police by the private sector for sometimes even, for better pay. And compounding the recruitment challenge is the high attrition rate currently sweeping through the nation's police agencies, again, as these baby boomers get close to retirement. So, and furthermore, a couple of other things really quick before we move in or move on will be increased educational requirements in many of the jurisdictions that have limited the pool of eligible applicants. So kind of as you see here, so we have this new generation of folks, and we have to figure out, hey, how do we dispel these misconceptions caused by, you know, the media and television? And the educational requirements does kind of limit that pool of applicants. And then, you know, I think at the end of the day, people need to know that this is not just a job, it's a long-term career. It's a calling, if you will. Well, with all of those challenges there, how do these recruiters do this? Well, we mentioned a little bit about it, but there are numerous recruiting strategies that are used by law enforcement agencies, and the most common strategies involve like job postings on agencies' websites, personal contact, newspaper ads, and job fairs. And other common avenues for reaching potential applicants are through things like social media and visits to schools or colleges with law enforcement or criminal justice degree programs. And the IACP has a job website that lists job openings, you know, for a particular fee, so departments can actually advertise through there. And there are some search engines as well, some other websites that are out there that law enforcement agencies can utilize to get their information out. And some departments are focusing on recruiting second career officers. So for example, a recent rookie class in Appleton, Wisconsin Police Department included a car salesman, a former teacher, a juvenile counselor, a dental technician, a nurse, a paramedic, a businessman, and an assistant district attorney. So they basically had a career for a certain amount of years and now might be looking for something different. So here, you know, you can look at some of the strategies, and these are fairly recent, so it can kind of give you an idea. So, you know, websites and newspaper ads and job fairs. And here was a hiring event by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, where you can go and you can actually do the physical agility and do everything sometimes in one day. And hiring events by, say, the San Bernardino County Probation Department, or recruitment flyers like this one from Fontana, showing, hey, that they're hiring police officers and cadets and other positions, and using Facebook, which is a big deal now, and social media, and putting together these cool recruitment videos, and doing hiring and testing events where you can pretty much take the test, and then maybe a few hours later you can do the physical agility and get a background package and start filling out your stuff, so you can do a lot of things in one day. Or a seminar like Riverside County Sheriff's Department, where you can go and ask questions. And even going to specifically target individuals like women, because we've been trying to hire quite a few more women in law enforcement, and we're not really totally sure why we can't get as many women into the business as we would like. But a lot of times people will, or departments will put together, say here, like this one, a women's symposium on how to work in law enforcement. And when I was at Rialto, we did some tactics to attract women, where we actually had a women's physical fitness challenge where you could go and do the PT test to see if you could pass it. So at least that way you would kind of know where you were maybe physically. And so these are some of the strategies that are truly out there. Now, again, numerous strategies are recommended, and IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, kind of recommends a few, and it would be to collaborate with other police agencies and engage the community. Streamline that recruitment and selection process so it doesn't take forever. Involve everyone in the department in recruiting, and put someone in charge of it, and tell the police story. enhance your web outreach and enlist the support of perhaps the media if you need to. And if you look here, we did this. We reached out to the media. Remember, we have that symbiotic relationship where we need each other. Well, we needed them to help us. And they decided, hey, this is a great idea, Chief. So let's publish this article and a flyer. This is somebody else's, but we made a flyer similar to that about this women's event, and they put this in the newspaper for us. And we thought that was really cool and very helpful. And reaching out to the young and hire younger and older, as well as transitional workers, those that have already had a career, but maybe they're looking for another one. And then mentor these people as they go through the process. Another important factor is going to be, in that recruiting process, is going to be recruiting for diversity. And we have learned that to be effective, police cannot operate alone. They require the active support and assistance of their communities. And central to maintaining that support is the recognition that law enforcement agencies must in fact reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. Every day, our officers come into contact with individuals from different cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, classes, religions, sexual orientations, physical and mental abilities. And each of these groups brings a different perspective to the police community relations effort. And as a result, our police officers must be prepared to respond to the appropriate, that group in the appropriate fashion. So it only makes sense to recruit from the community that you're in and to attract more diverse recruits. And to do this, agencies have started to advertise in a different light, portraying many of the aspects of police work, such as participating in community policing events, assisting those in need, and working with youth in school. And many departments have ads showing minorities and women in higher level positions. So recruiting for diversity will foster a community relations, and it increases police effectiveness. And to gain the public's general confidence and acceptance, police departments need to seek to represent the communities they serve. Now, when it comes to women, in 2014, women occupied about 11.9% of all sworn positions and about 26.5% of the positions in police agencies overall. And one barrier to preventing women from considering a career in law enforcement, honestly, is the absence of a good role model or mentor that's already working in the business. And I can speak from total experience on this. Men, just like women, and women just like men, will look for a strong role model. And if we don't have enough of those strong role model women in leadership roles or in the organization at all, it's going to be difficult for us to have someone mentor. And it doesn't mean that a man can't mentor. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to paint myself into a corner here. But a lot of times we are looking for that individual role model or mentor. And it truly is something that will benefit the department. So we talked about gaining the public's general confidence and acceptance by seeking to recruit those that represent the community we serve. And an integrated department helps reduce things like stereotyping and prejudice. And minority officers provide a department with an understanding of minority groups, their languages, their subcultures, and all with practical benefits to successful law enforcement. And I mean, so an example that can be used would be a police officer who speaks Spanish can help prevent conflicts between the police and the community's Spanish-speaking residents, because they might have some insight, not only just the language, but some insight that maybe the organization needs in order to establish a better better reputation or working relationship with that particular group. So hopefully some of this kind of makes sense to you. And it really does, though, all come down to this. It comes down to the importance of hiring well. So after an agency has identified and recruited these candidates, these potential individuals, the question becomes, hey, who do I hire? And the hiring process is so critical in law enforcement, partly because of this word called vicarious liability, which refers to the legal responsibility one person has for the acts of another. So now listen, okay, and listen really close on this. Managers, the entire agency, and even the jurisdiction served may be legally responsible for the actions of a single officer. That's pretty crazy. And vicarious means taking the place of another thing or person or substituting for. So law enforcement have always been responsible for their individual wrongdoings, criminally or civilly. Civil liability most frequently involves violations of the Civil Rights Act, specifically Statute 42 of the U.S. Code, Section 1983, that we discussed back in Chapter 2. And the Act states that anyone acting under the authority of law who violates another person's constitutional rights can be sued. And, that's the essence of civil liability or vicarious liability. So, civil liability in its definition, a legal obligation incurred for an injury or similar that results from the failure to conduct a specific task within a specific standard, and typically it's about money. That's going to be the payoff. And then they have this thing called negligent hiring. And this is where there is negligence in hiring personnel that are unqualified or unsuited for law enforcement. And it's becoming a little bit more common because law enforcement managers and supervisors have been held liable for negligence in hiring personnel unqualified and unsuited for law enforcement work. And negligent hiring cases allow evidence about a person's past negligence and reputation, and items typically not admissible in court proceedings. And as such, liability in negligent hiring cases can be tremendous, and the results are often disastrous. And most of these cases involve failure to use an adequate selection process or to check for prior offenses or misconduct. So it comes down to that hiring process. So remember earlier we talked about some agencies that in order to recruit, they might lax their hiring standards. Well, if they do that, then what could happen would be the laxing of the process and the way that you typically do things, which means that you could actually put yourself in a negligent hiring type situation. So hopefully that kind of you understand how that kind of goes. So what is the selection process? How do you, and this may differ, from one place to another place, but they're, typically this is how it's going to go. And I'm not going to go through every single one and define them. I will let you do that, but these are just some general steps that are involved in the police officer selection. And again, go into your textbook, and as I talk about each one of these later on, go back and read what it actually means. So the first would be the formal application and resume. And then it could be a written exam. We don't do a lot of video exams, but it could be a written exam. And then it could be the physical fitness test, and some departments have these in different order as well. And then they will do a psychological exam. And at least one oral interview at the very, very beginning of this or a little bit further in. So at least one oral interview. And then they're going to do the background investigation, which is going to be which could include a polygraph test, and more than likely in California it will. It will include a polygraph test. And then finally would be the medical examination. Now most law enforcement agencies, again, require that a police officer be a U.S. citizen, have or be eligible for a driver's license in the state, because you could live in a different state and you don't have a California driver's license. So you could still apply in California as a law enforcement officer. You would just have to be eligible for a driver's license. And then typically not have been convicted of a felony. And sometimes they even have things like what they call residency requirements, or education requirements, and they will state those in that recruitment flyer. So again, this is just kind of a basic overview, if you will, as it relates to the steps that are required. And education requirements, just to touch on quickly, for officers has long been a source of controversy. Opinions do differ greatly about the level of education a police officer candidate should have, or how much should be a prerequisite for advancement. And typically most police agencies require a minimum of a high school education or equivalency certificate, and some require a 2 or 4-year degree. And standards for promotion commonly include a 2-year degree, or sometimes even a 4-year degree, especially if you're moving up above the rank of, say, sergeant, and you're going to be a lieutenant or a captain or something like that. Now, there's really limited empirical evidence that exists about whether such education helps officers perform better, but at the end of the day, a lot of chiefs of police and staff members are focusing their organizations on education, and they do understand the value of having an educated employee. So we'll go through the selection process again just really quick so you can get kind of an idea, and then we're going to have to move on. So the written exam, civil service or department designed written exam, test spelling, grammar, sometimes math, may also test reasoning ability, problem solving, reading comprehension, interpersonal skills, or the ability to process information. And the physical fitness test evaluates a candidate's coordination, speed, strength, and can ascertain whether the candidate is in good physical condition. The psychological testing is to determine if the person is emotionally suited for a career in policing. The interview is to evaluate an applicant's appearance, alertness, communication ability, social adaptability, judgment, emotional stability, and the interest in the job, and job suitability. The background examines and verifies the candidate's past work and educational record, and determines if anything in the candidate's background make them an unsuitable candidate for a police officer. And then don't forget, that could also include the polygraph. And testing and assessment centers, sometimes they have these and sometimes they don't, can be video-based simulations or scenarios to evaluate judgment or decision making and physical reflexes. Typically at the entry level, most police departments don't really use assessment centers, but there are some that have. And the medical examination requirements vary from state to state and department to department, and they look for things like vision and hearing and cardiovascular and respiratory systems, the health of these, and of course any prior drug use. I talked about the polygraph that is used to corroborate information not on the application, or criminal activity where a person may not have been apprehended, but they were in fact perhaps involved in some type of activity. And then I put a link to this really good website. It's the Peace Officers Standards and Training website. This is commonly referred to as POST, or the Commission on Post, and this is basically the governing body of California law enforcement that helps set standards for hiring and training and recruitment, and even testing. And there are a lot of resources on here to where you can actually look for jobs on here. You can even take practice exams on here as well. So there's a lot of stuff in here. And if you want to know what the big background packet looks like, they call it a PHS, or a personal history statement, and it's probably 50 pages long. And that's where you're going to put all of your personal information into. They have that you can download, and you can type into it, and you can start preparing that early so you can get it filled out and have it ready should you get an opportunity to test for a certain department. So let's talk federal for just a few minutes here. The basic rule of thumb when we talk about federal guidelines and regulations is that all requirements must be clearly job related, and a bona fide occupational qualification is one that reasonably necessary to perform the job. And it may on the surface appear to be kind of discrimination, so you have to kind of look though. But for example, in law enforcement, applicants may be required to have normal or correctable to normal hearing and vision, because these attributes are required to perform the job. So some people might say, well, hey, that's not fair that I have to have, correctable vision to 2030 or 2020 or whatever it is now. Well, there are some guidelines and regulations that law enforcement has to go by, but because of the nature of the job, there are some things that they can list that are truly necessary. An example would be color blindness. Now, if you can't see colors, yes, we understand, and we're very sorry for that, but at the same time, if you can't distinguish colors, how would you be able to see a young kid holding an orange gun that's a dart gun or a play gun versus a black gun? And these are important issues, and that's why there are these guidelines and things that are put forth to help the agencies deal with specific things. And then the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. Well, in 1964, Congress enacted the Omnibus Civil Rights Law, of which Title VII concerned employment opportunities and prohibited discrimination based on sex, race, color, religion, or national origin. And the law also established the EEOC as its administrator. And this law affected only private business, not state and local governments, and therefore had little impact on police agencies. Well, in 1972, Congress passed the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, which modified Title VII to include state and local units of government. Now, this law was passed because 6 years after the EEOC published guidelines for employment and promotion testing, few state and local central personnel selection agencies had taken positive steps to meet those kinds of guidelines. And then affirmative action. Well, what is that? Well, affirmative action is basically results-oriented actions taken to ensure equal employment opportunity. And that defines what affirmative action is. And then, of course, there is the American with Disabilities Act. And further complicating the selection and employment process is the American Disabilities Act, or ADA, which President George Bush signed into law in July of 1990. Now, the purpose of the civil rights law is to guarantee equal opportunity to jobs for qualified individuals with disabilities. And the Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act, which went into effect January 1st, 2009, provided new definitions and broadened the group of individuals eligible for protection under the Guarded As clause of the ADA. And what effect the changes will have on police departments is not yet known, but experts agree that an increase in the number of 80-day related lawsuits might be likely to result. Now, conditions excluded from protection under the ADA Act here would include current use of illegal drugs, compulsive gambling, kleptomania, pyromania, sexual behavior disorders and dysfunctions, or pedophilia, or voyeurism, or exhibitionism, or psychological disorders caused by the current use or prior use of illegal drugs. So really what this comes down to is this. During the application process, the ADA prohibits employers from asking any questions or conducting any medical examinations that would identify applicants with disabilities or the nature and extent of such disabilities. But tests for illegal drugs are not considered medical exams under the ADA, and employers can ask pre-employment questions about the applicant's ability to perform central jobs. So this is all fair and equitable things that fall underneath the Americans with Disabilities Act. But when you talk about interviewing and maybe trying to streamline things, it kind of means that during the interview, the employers can't ask certain medical questions because they're not supposed to be able to discriminate on disability, which I totally understand. And it can set minimum standards that the applicant has to meet because of the job. So when you get on, after you make it through that whole academy thing, and I think we're going to cover some of that in a few minutes, and we're going to have to kind of wrap things up. The typical probationary period is usually what they consider like 1 year. So it's usually a trial year, basically. And when you talk about training and civil liability, there's a couple of words that fall into play. So police officers may obtain their training in a state police academy, city academy, or specialized, say rookie school. And the basic training of police officers varies with each jurisdiction and its needs, but most officers will be trained in constitutional law, laws of arrest, search and seizure, the various requests for service, such as accident investigation, crisis intervention, first aid. And while in training, recruits may be required to return to the department and spend a specified number of hours on street patrol. And some jurisdictions alternate their training periods every 2 weeks, allowing an officer to apply on the street what they have learned in the academy. And while on the street, the recruits ride with who they call a field training officer, who monitors their movements and helps them apply principles learned in the academy. And officers typically ride with an FTO anywhere from 2 to 4 months and train directly with another officer out on the field before going out on their own. And training a lot of time will consist of phases that begin with kind of the first phase of FTO training, and then the second phase, and then maybe the third phase, which might be a thing called shadowing, which is where they kind of follow the officer around. And it's different everywhere. But when it comes to training and civil liability, civil lawsuits related to training and law enforcement commonly fall into 2 areas. And that would be what they call failure to train litigation and civil liability for injuries sustained during training. And I'm not going to go into the case that's there, but I wanted to just make sure that you knew that those 2 aspects of civil liability were out there. So now that we kind of know some liability things, and we've pretty much walked through the whole process, how do we keep them? Meaning, like, how do we retain officers? And why do they leave? Well, sometimes there are increased rates of staff turnover. And why officers leave might be, it could be anything from a bad boss to maybe low pay. And this process we talked about of recruiting, selecting, and training is expensive and time consuming. And the problem intensifies with the loss of more experienced officers. So it can be very, very costly. Now, there might be some other things that we have to kind of look at, like do we have any type of harassment going on in the organization, and we have to eliminate that. It could be stress or burnout. It could be lack of training or feedback or recognition or all of these things. So again, salary and benefits among police departments, kind of vary. There's not a lot of uniformity. So there are those issues. You have the two legally recognized types of sexual harassment that are out there, and one type is called quid pro quo, which usually involves a supervisor's demand for sexual favors from an employee in return for a job benefit, like a promotion or to get out of discipline. And the second type would be like hostile work environment, or harassment. And as the name implies, it occurs when an employee perceives his or her work environment to be antagonistic, or intimidating, or things like that. So you've got all these other issues that are out there, and stress or burnout. No discussion of retention would really be complete without recognizing the highly stressful nature of this job, and police officers deal with crises daily, usually that of someone else, not their own. And sometimes, however, the demands of the roles and how they are expected to be performed create enough stress to put the officers themselves into kind of a crisis situation. So a lot of things are out there. Well, with some of these things and retention, and how do we keep cops from leaving and things like that, there's a lot of different retention strategies, and many departments are now realizing that successfully retaining officers begins before the officers are hired. So conducting good interviews and providing realistic job previews, these are crucial things. Police managers also recognize the greater importance placed on employees on needs sometimes rather than salary, such as training and feedback and recognition and career assessment or counseling. And these are some things that can help with retention. And on the side of the officers, if you will, would be things like unions. And another way that officers seek to protect their interest is by establishing what we call police labor unions and other local employee organizations. And police labor unions have played an active role in law enforcement and have provided numerous benefits to police officers for a long time. And these unions do a lot of things. They also are involved in what we call collective bargaining, meaning that they're the ones that will bargain for wages and benefits and salaries, and things like that. And collective bargaining in itself is the process whereby representatives of employees meet with management to establish that written contract that sets forth all those working conditions, to include things like pay, and hours worked and benefits, and discipline procedures, and a lot of different things that kind of come into play. And then sometimes, finally, as we finish up here, officers might work at a different job. And this is called moonlighting, which is kind of a part-time job while fulfilling the obligations of a full-time position. Sometimes there is a little bit of controversy, and there are some limitations on what officers can do and where they can work. So there are no conflicts, and I'll let you read a little bit more about that. Training would be another thing. We talk about accreditation, and I'm not going to go into CALIA too much, but there are some progressive and time-proven ways of helping law enforcement agencies improve their overall performance. And one of those would be through this accreditation standard. And one of the standards that is out there is through this particular group called CALIA. And it addresses, it comes in 5 phases, if you will, but it also addresses 9 major law enforcement subjects, and it helps these officers and the department become basically accredited, which is kind of a higher standard than some of the actual other standards that might be listed out here. And then finally, the police professionalism area. Well, the most notable advancement in the field of law enforcement has been the professionalization of police. And this is partly because 80 to 90% of most police agencies' budgets are allocated for personnel. So therefore, agencies are demanding higher quality performance from their personnel. And this is sometimes difficult to obtain, however, because many police departments are understaffed. And the attrition rates throughout the United States, approximately 100,000 officers per year, compounds the problem and creates a constant demand for training. So there are three key elements of professionalism, and one would be specialized knowledge, and two, autonomy, and three, the service ideal. And we'll touch on these and then we'll wrap up. So the time when someone could walk into a police department, fill out an application, and be hired is gone in most parts of the country. And although a college degree requirement has been advocated since 1967, the President's Commission, no states currently really meet this goal. But specialized knowledge is definitely an important factor. And autonomy. Police autonomy refers to the ability to control entrance into the profession, to define the content of the knowledge to be obtained, and to be responsible for self-monitoring and discipline. And in addition to autonomy of the profession is usually authorized by the power of the state. For example, physicians, dentists, lawyers, etc. are licensed by the state. And law enforcement doesn't really fit that criterion of professional autonomy, in that the requirement to be a police officer are usually set by the legislature. And the growth in the number of post boards, which would be peace officer standards and training throughout the country to oversee the profession, that kind of attests to that fact. And then the service ideal, the third element of a profession, a service ideal, requires that members of the profession follow a formal code of ethics and be committed to serving the community. In this area, police officers qualify as professionals, provided the department stresses the public servant aspect of police work. Now, I know that was a lot of information, and quite a lot. And when we talk about professionalism, I actually didn't know this slide was in here. We're going to talk a little bit later on. I'm going to do a separate lecture on body cameras and the impact that body cameras have possibly had on the overall professionalism of law enforcement. And this is just kind of a precursor, the beginning of what the presentation will look like. It was done by Professor Barak Ariel of the University of Cambridge and myself, and the Rialto Police Department, and it was a very interesting experiment, which I think you'll enjoy. And you can kind of give your own opinion on whether or not you think that these tools are beneficial to policing. So with that being said, that's going to wrap up our lecture for Chapter 12. And again, take the time to read the chapter to fill in the blanks and fill in the holes and add some context to the conversation that we've had this evening. Look at the key words at the beginning of the chapter and take the time to look at a few of the discussion questions, because I think those will help you out as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the discussion board. If you don't want to post them there, feel free to send me an email. And again, don't forget the student resources. So with that being said, that'll be it for this evening. Until next time.